Welcome to Revolutionize Your Retirement Radio, bringing you insights and strategies to help you create a magnificent and fulfilling second half of life. Here's your host, certified professional retirement coach and best-selling author, Dr. Dorian Mintzer.
I want to welcome everybody to my fourth Tuesday Revolutionize Your Retirement Interview with Expert series to help you create a fulfilling second half of life. I'm Dorian Mintzer, owner of Revolutionize Retirement and host for today. And I'm just delighted that you're here. Let me tell you a little about Louise Nayer. She grew up in New York City, received her bachelor's in Comparative Literature from the University of Wisconsin, and later got a Master's of Arts in Humanities from the SUNY Buffalo, where she studied with poets Robert Creeley and John Logan. In 1956, she put all of her belongings in a '68 Camaro and moved to San Francisco, where she's dedicated her life to writing and teaching. She's the author of 5 books, and most recently, her book is Poised for Retirement, Moving from Anxiety to Zen. She kept a journal for the 5 months before she left her community college teaching job and wrote about the importance of emotional planning for retirement. That book also offers calming exercises to help people through that time. And I want to tell you, I read the book, and I love the way you do it by the month, and with all of the nice suggestions of how to, kind of deal with, the normal kind of anxiety that can happen with a big transition, a big change in life. Her book, Burned, a memoir, was an Oprah Great Read and winner of the Wisconsin Library Association Award. That book chronicles the devastating effects of an explosion in Cape Cod that burned her parents when she was 4 years old and left her mother facially disfigured. That book outlines the lasting effects of child-parent separation. She's also written for OZ and the San Francisco Chronicle and has been interviewed in 4 Louise is a longtime educator and member of the San Francisco Writers Grotto. She teaches memoir classes at the Grotto through the OLLI program, the Osher Lifelong Learning Program at UC Berkeley, and works with people individually. She's given readings of her work at university and bookstores all over the country and has been interviewed widely on radio, including NPR. She has 2 grown daughters and a stepdaughter and lives with her husband and dog, Ella, in Glen Park in San Francisco. So, Louise, I am so delighted that you are with us today and wanted to, and again, just to remind people, there is a handout if you want to take a look at it, but you don't have to because Louise will be sharing and talking, basically from her book. So maybe we can start with, how did you get interested in the whole idea of emotional planning for retirement?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to the show. It's really a great honor. And, the way I got interested was I decided to retire somewhat early. I was 61 and a half, and all these anxieties flooded my system. And I just thought, well, I need to write. Writing for me has always been an outlet. So I just started taking notes. And I really wasn't thinking, I'm going to make this a book. But as I started walking down the road in my community college from one class to the other, just all these feelings surfaced. And I thought, well, this could be really useful for other people. So that's how I just thought, well, we all go to financial planners, and, I was sitting there trying to calculate, can I do this? Can I do this? Or going to the Social Security office, which is actually how the book begins. And then I thought, it's really, for me, it was all the fears that surfaced. And, I'm sure we'll be discussing them, and you'll see it from the slideshow, but from making the decision to really maintaining a healthy life. You know, how do you do it emotionally? So that's how I got interested. And I tend to be somebody who talks about my feelings and my anxieties. And I thought, you know, a lot of people don't articulate what's going on. Mm-hmm. And then suddenly they're retired and they thought it was going to be totally wonderful. And it, you know, maybe it's better to do emotional planning, to think about who you are and then what would make you happy, you know, when you actually do retire. And
I
also,
think it's
how are you going to...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and even replacing, you're never going to replace exactly your job or the people that you saw every day, and many who you spent more time with than sometimes your own family. You know, you were there all day. So how do you plan for that? And you know, everybody
do a beautiful, yeah, no, it's true. And you do a beautiful job in the book of really sharing your story, but also you interviewed other people along the way, which sort of adds to it. Again, I want to just recommend the book to people. Can you share, I mean, maybe start us at the beginning of, you know, like what were some of the anxieties that you and some of the people you interviewed felt, you know, just as you began sort of even just thinking about, contemplating it, the retirement?
Well, it's interesting because I was lucky to have a passion that I knew I wanted to write. So I was really surprised that one of the anxieties was, I'm going to miss my students. I mean, I saw them all the time, and I'm going to miss that feeling of going into class and being known and even the adulation of that. And other people felt the same thing. They were really terrified of being lonely and of feeling isolated. And of course, there's a study called the Grant study, which basically says that connections to others, which we all know, is the most important in life. And even people who are introverts need connection, you know, whether it's meeting somebody at a coffee shop or reaching out to old friends. But I thought, you know, what am I going to do? And I'm going to wake up and I'm going to miss those little chats too that you don't realize when you leave your job. You know, whether you're getting a cup of coffee, these 3 to 5 minute chats about somebody's life or a grandchild and, you know, somebody being born or somebody having a success. So that was one of my big fears, being isolated and also losing my identity. And I never thought of myself as somebody, you know, who really held on to my identity. But I realized that was important. And in terms of people I interviewed, for instance, one friend of mine who teaches at NYU, who I just put in briefly, he was afraid of not being the professor, not, you know, being looked up to. And what he started to do was mentor students at the college that he went to. So I really suggested to people, and I did the same thing, that, and I'm sure everybody on the call, some of you are retired and some of you are about to retire, but to try and plan and think about, well, what do you need? Maybe you do need a lot of adulation and you need to find the right volunteer opportunity where you're going to really be appreciated every day. And for me, I knew I needed to write, but I didn't want to write in isolation. So I actually joined a writing community, the San Francisco Writers Grotto, before I left my job. So I knew I had somewhere to go. So I really suggested to people to think about, you know, what you might need. One friend of mine moved to be near her daughter who had twins to help her out. And it was a really tough move because her husband didn't want to go. He didn't want to leave where they had lived and the garden he created. And, you know, they packed everything up and, you know, put their dog in the car and moved. And it's been the best thing ever for her because she is very connected to her grandkids. But it was not easy. These transitions are not easy, but it's looking at, well, what would really make you happy? Some people started, a friend of mine, Steve, who I interviewed, was the head of a club, and he was constantly surrounded by people. And now he volunteers at the VA, and he brings meals to people. So it took a little while, but a lot of people I interviewed seemed to find something that really fed them. So that was really wonderful to see, but the actual transition wasn't always easy. And that was a thing to also alert people to. When I joined the grotto, the first day I was there, I looked around and I thought, where are all my friends? Where are all these friends from City College? And I felt like a middle schooler. Are people going to like me? Are people going to like my writing? And it's almost starting again. And so you're thrust into a whole new phase of life. And I think the more that people are just open, as maybe you were when you were a child, that there are all these things you can do, the better it is. One example was my sister, who actually always wanted to be a puppeteer. And she was, I think, 68, went to the bread and puppet theater in Vermont and slept on a shelf for 3 weeks. Not everybody would do that, but it was always a dream she had. And that's the other thing, is when we're young, we have so many dreams and so many things get stuffed in boxes in the basement. And retirement's really a time to open up some of those boxes. And you might not be the best pianist in the world, or maybe you can't be a ballet dancer anymore, but you can do things that you love and connect with other people through that.
So how did what you've just said is so true, that, it's like brainstorming with yourself and other people and just thinking about, who am I now? Who do I want to be? How do I want to be? I think it's part of it too.
Right.
And, for some people, and what you're really talking about is what I so often say too, of thinking about what you're retiring to. And that's, so much of what you're talking about the emotional planning. And for some people, it's to using your skills in a different way, whether it be the volunteering or an encore career.
Right, exactly.
Can you share a little, because you do in the book, and it's such a lovely thing, of just how you and your husband, I know you didn't retire at the same time, but sort of how you decided that, this was something that was right for you to do.
Yeah, it's interesting because one chapter in the book, actually it's April, because I divided into the months before I left my job, is about trusting ourselves and our decision to retire. And my husband has always been completely supportive of my writing. And I've been, very lucky. When the kids were really little, I would go into a room at 5:00 when he came home every Monday, and he would make a special night for them, and I would write. And that's really how I wrote my memoir, Burned. I had this time that was so precious to me. So when he retired, and he kind of joked with me, he said, "Oh, now that I'm retired, you're going to want to retire." And he's 6 years older than me, but he completely supported my decision, even though financially it wasn't the perfect decision by any means. But he said, if you need and want this time to write, and so you need to do this, and we'll figure it out. And it's leaving, I had all these voices in my head, of the shoulds of life. I could see my mother, who never bounced a check in her life and grew up during the Depression, saying, stay longer. Bread could cost $10 a loaf. You never know with inflation. And all these voices swirling in my head. And then I finally had to say, my neck is hurting from grading papers. I'll figure it out. and I left at 61 and a half, and I was lucky to have a pension, but it wasn't going to cover everything. And I'm so glad I made that decision, and I'm so glad I listened to what I really needed. And I found with people I interviewed that when it came time to leave a job, that a kind of exhaustion set in, that was pretty clear for everybody. Because sometimes people will say, well, how do I know when I should retire? And often I say, you'll know. You'll know when it's just time. And you do the best you can with all the finances and figuring that out. But you will hit a wall. And that's what I really felt. And for the people that I talked to, too, they just thought, okay, maybe I'll push another year or two if I have to financially, but I need to get out. So I think that's a really important thing to do, is to listen to your body also, because I felt, and other people felt, that if they had kept going, they really would have gotten sick. And sadly, there are people who don't get to retire, who do get sick or get sick after retirement. And that's just life. But if you can figure out a way to try and keep yourself healthy, that's incredibly important. And for me and a lot of people I interviewed, it meant it's time to go. I should say one just funny thing that's in the book is my parents' urns are on the Upper West Side in New York City, and I actually went to visit them there after they had passed away, obviously. And I remember sitting there talking to their urns, and I was like a little kid, should I retire? Shouldn't I retire? Because they were always so big in my mind and in some ways so perfect. And it was, can I retire? Can I? And then I just said, this is ridiculous. In my 60s, I'm making my own decision. But I think that's true in life, that there are a lot of voices that come in and out, and we have to just be quiet and listen to ourselves and what we really need. And listen, if we have a partner, listen to our partners too and what they really need. And so Jim now, which is kind of interesting, we both needed to make a little money. And when he was young, he always wanted to teach history. And we were staying at a friend's house when we were renting out our house on Airbnb, and she needed a current events teacher for an adult school. So now he's teaching history. He'll be 75 this year, and it's a dream he had when he was young. So you never know, and that's one of the things that I really say in the book. And there's a poem by Hafiz who writes, open up to the roof, change rooms in your mind for a day, greet yourself in your 1,000 other forms. And I think what you were saying, Dory, about, that, you don't know. There's so many opportunities and so many ways that we as older, wiser people can use our skills in the world, which really needs our skills.
It's so true, and you have some beautiful examples in the book. Can you talk, we'll ultimately get to some of the calming techniques, but you mentioned a couple of the fears that, kind of created a lot of anxieties in you, the fear of losing community, fear of losing identity. Can you just maybe expand on that? I mean, part of what I think is so lovely in the book is you mentioned just these day-to-day kind of things that happen, and, it's like through your sharing, it just normalizes so much for people of, oh yeah, it's those little chats, or it's this thing, or,
Right.
And I know you mentioned a number of other fears, so I just want you to expand on that, if you would.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that happened was I started to have really strange dreams. And, sometimes that happens before a big transition, and some people remember their dreams and some people don't. But I remember one dream I had where I was in a warehouse and there was a big elevator, and I saw people in the elevator who looked like skeletons, and they were beckoning me into the elevator. And I felt if I got on that I would be useless or I would die. And I think that's a big fear, that, you felt that you've contributed to a job or something for so many years. And then who are you now? And I felt like, who am I going to be? As I walked by the bookstore, I thought, I'm not going to be ordering books for my classes. All those little things, even the smell of the bookstore when I went in and all the new books and the people that I had known, I just thought it started to hit me that I'm not going to see them anymore. And then I had another dream because I knew I wanted to write. And I remember I had a dream where there was a player piano and it was going so fast that I couldn't capture the words. And so it was this fear that what I really want to do, I won't be able to do. So those were, a lot of the things that came up. And mainly it was also, a sadness too, of having to say goodbye to people, because the reality is, I think for a lot of us, that maybe if you're really lucky and you keep up with people you worked with, you can see them regularly, but a lot of us don't. And I felt like as the years have gone on, I've seen people less and less, or I go back to my place of work and everybody's busy because they're working at the job. And, so, there are a lot of feelings of almost uselessness, or all those things can come up. And I remember even funny things, like I would walk by a mailbox and I remember, mailing, Valentines to my grandkids who live in Connecticut, or mailing applications for my kids for college, or mailing letters to people. And I was thinking, well, I'm not going to be mailing anything from that mailbox anymore. So even inanimate objects became important in an interesting way, or a sculpture that I passed. And I actually started noticing more things. As it was time to say goodbye, I noticed people more. And that's one thing in the book too, is I have the importance of saying goodbye, because sometimes people obviously really can't wait to get out of their jobs, or they have a terrible boss situation. I certainly interviewed one woman who was a nurse and just felt she kept getting pushed and pushed and pushed. And she just got out really quickly and didn't get a chance to say goodbye to some of her patients. And that was just the reality. But if you can say goodbye to people in a good way, it's great. It's really wonderful. And look somebody in the face and say how much they meant to you. It makes it really adds so much to the leave taking. But yeah, there were all these funny little things with the mailbox and the sculptures and things I remember. And saying goodbye to my students, was really hard.
Yeah, and you mentioned the importance of taking time to do that, but also in one section of the book you talk a little about rituals being sort of a helpful thing. Can you talk a little about that?
Well, I think that, what you can do, for instance, when you're saying goodbye, you could decide to have lunch with people or to take pictures. I mean, now so many of us have smartphones, so you can, have pictures with people. You can really, really make an effort to calm yourself. And I can talk later about some of the calming exercises. But so you you end in a way that's really good. And even little things like cleaning your office, for those of us who've had offices. I remember sitting there and of course as an, English teacher, I had so many pieces of paper that mostly that people would not want. But I had an office mate and he was teaching some of the same classes. So I remember giving him some of my paperwork for certain classes or, tests I gave or questions I gave. And he was so excited to have them. And that's the other thing is that we all want to leave a legacy somehow. And in terms of our work life, being able to pass something on is really important. I know one man I interviewed named Barry spent the last 2 or 3 months at his job as a city planner training somebody, and a lot of people have that experience where you really want to give something to the next person who's coming or to the new generation, and that's a really important thing. So it made me feel better that Steve, my office mate, would be able to use some of the things that I had. And an example, my friend Dixie, who moved up to be near her grandchildren, she was a Montessori teacher. And so she had tons and tons of things, lesson plans and art supplies and things she made. And she was able to give some of them away, but not all of them. So, some things just got recycled. And some things, of course, she can use with her own grandchildren now. But it's interesting how that stuff, you feel an attachment. And I remember when I was throwing out the list of student names over the years, and I had often 100 students a semester. So it was a lot of people who came in and out of my classes. And I thought, do I keep these lists? Do I throw them out? So it was interesting. I looked at the names and it brought back a lot of memories. And of course, I ended up keeping some of them, but a lot of things get recycled.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it is interesting to just think about all of the things that go into, that we accumulate, I guess, over time, that go into our work. And that given the transition of the endings of just needing to let go of things to
exactly,
but that idea that things can be used in different ways, or that you live on through programs you've started, or
right,
that you've touched, so many students in your work. I'm beginning to get some great questions from people, and I realize I didn't say at the beginning, but let me say now, while people are still on the call, that next Tuesday, when I have my Boomers and Beyond special interest group, Louise has said that she's going to be able to join the call. So I want to invite anybody from this call, even if you haven't been part of the Boomers and Beyond SIG or special interest group, that you're welcome to join the call. And Donna, when she sends the recording, will send the call-in information. For the Boomers and Beyond special interest group, you don't have to sign up ahead of time. So you will get information about that. Before I go to the questions that people are asking, can you share some of the calming techniques that you used and still use that you talk about in the book?
Yeah, definitely. As somebody, Dori, you mentioned about the book I wrote about the explosion that burned my parents. It left me with, perhaps more anxiety than some other people, although I realize, a lot of people have anxiety. So at one point in my life, I went to see a hypnotist, and she gave me a 3-minute meditation, which I use, during the day many times. And it's basically just to imagine a beautiful place in nature, and it can be made up or a real place, and get very calm as you're thinking about it. And then you see a skywriter writing numbers, 100, and then the cloud disappears, 99, and it disappears. And you go maybe down to 97 or 96. And then you give yourself a simple suggestion. It could be, I have lots of friends and family to connect with in retirement. For instance, if you're afraid of isolation, or I will find a great volunteer opportunity, whatever you want, or I feel calm as I move into this new phase of life. And you just say that to yourself and feel the calmness and then open your eyes. And it's amazing. My hypnotist said that some people said, I don't even have 3 minutes in the day to do that. But, everybody does. And then the other one that I still use a lot for sleeping is to imagine a dresser. And the one I imagined was a dresser that my artist daughter painted blue with little silver knobs. And in each drawer, you can put an anxiety. And so, for instance, it can be an anxiety about money. So you, in your mind, open the drawer, put all your money fears in and close the drawer and basically say, I'll deal with that tomorrow. Or you're worried about your health. Open the drawer, put your fear in there and close the drawer. And that really helped me a lot in just going to sleep. And I know I also have a bunch of articles too that are in the book. And one of them is by Daniel Levitin, who talks about making lists. And sometimes just writing down 5 or 6 things that you're worried about and say, I'll deal with that tomorrow. And it's all just to have a really good sleep because, as we all know, sleep is really crucial to our health. So those are just a couple of them, but there are definitely other ones in the book too.
And we can come back to some of them as we go along, but I think some of the questions now feel like they will kind of help us think about sort of what happens once the decision's made and once you retire. So I will ask these, but one person has asked would you be able to just real quickly, or maybe the title of the poem of the Hafiz, is it Hafiz poem?
Oh, yeah, it's called Hemispheres.
It's called what? I'm sorry, say again. Say it once more.
Hemispheres. Hemispheres.
Oh, hemispheres. Okay. Hemispheres. Yeah. Okay, great. So Jane from Chevy Chase had asked that.
Yeah.
So,
great.
Well, let me ask the question because I think it will lead into you sharing a little of kind of what happened for you once you did actually retire. I have 2 questions that sort of relate to that. Loretta from Denver says, I gave notice yesterday after 35 years with the same company. Oh, wow. I'm only 57, so concerned that you just said 61 was young. While I had not been planning this for years, the actual decision was a bit precipitous. You talked about what to do. Can you recommend what not to do in the first 90 days?
Yeah, this is a great question. And by the way, the time sounds totally right for you, so I wouldn't get hung up on the age at all. And my feeling about it is the book also includes 3 years after retirement. And of course, now I've been retired about 7 years. But I think sometimes what a lot of people do is they're so afraid of, quote, the void. What's going to happen, how I'm going to be isolated, who will I be, that they start to fill their lives with too many things. I'll give you a couple of examples. A friend of mine ended up taking on so many volunteer opportunities that she actually quoted E.B. White, who said, I wake up torn between whether I'm going to do something good for humanity or do something good for myself. And this friend Betsy always wanted to take walks with friends when she retired, and she found that she just got consumed with all these volunteer opportunities. And actually it's still been kind of hard for her to extricate herself. So I would suggest that you really hold on to what you really want to do when you retire. Do you want to take walks more? Do you want to do a little traveling? A lot of people, go on a big trip or they go on a small trip, and make sure that you do it, because it's very easy to take on so many things because there's so many things to do. So that would be one thing I would say. Just make sure that, you think about what you would like and not and really block out part of your day if you can to do that. And the other thing is to really experiment. Some people don't know what they want to do and think, okay, well, I'm going to go join a hiking club or take a class. But very often I would say, if you can afford it financially and everything, take some time off, and just get to know yourself again a little bit and what you love and what you loved as a child, and maybe, pick some things up again, take piano lessons if that's what you liked. So that would be my suggestion.
That's great. It ties right into Barbara's question from New Jersey. Let me just ask the question because maybe it will trigger some other things that you might want to share to her. She just says, thank you for your insightful call. She said she's 62 and a half, employed full-time, and is contemplating the next phase. Unlike you, Louise, she said, I don't have a burning passion. I wish I did. While I enjoy writing, practicing yoga, and spending time in nature, I don't have a strong desire to stop working to pursue any of them with a greater zest. My question is, how do you find your passion in retirement? Is it more advisable to continue to work until the passion reveals itself, if it ever does? Or is it better to just take that leap, live the question in retirement until the passion surfaces? I always wanted to retire to something, not from something. I guess I've been very fortunate that I've always enjoyed working. Any insights?
Oh, that's great. That's really a great question. Yeah, it's interesting because there's a Rilke quote about live the questions now,
right.
Then someday you will live, a distant day into the answer. That was really,
right.
I really liked how the question was phrased. Well, it's interesting because sometimes people say to me, oh, you have a passion, as if, that's wonderful that I have a passion. And I just want to say, sometimes it's really difficult because I feel driven in a certain way to write, to publish, to get it out there. And it's not always a great feeling. I mean, sometimes I would like to be more relaxed and not be driven in this passion. So it's not always a great thing to have this one passion. That's one thing I would say. Sometimes I look at people who have, do more things than I do. I basically write and I teach, and then, family and friends. But sometimes I think, God, I'd like to go back to playing the piano again, or I used to do a lot of sports. So I think one attitude is that you're really lucky that you have different things that you like to do, and not to feel like, oh, you have to have this one passion that drives you. And so, there's one exercise I have in here where you can put different things you love in a hat, maybe photography or singing or hiking or whatever it is you like, and just pick one out a month and spend a little time doing that or exploring it. And having a balanced life. I mean, it sounds like you've got yoga, you've got things that you really like to do. You could spend some more time, reading. And then I really do believe that what you love and a kind of balanced life will open itself up to you. But I wouldn't worry too much about having a passion. There's a downside to it too. I think sometimes there's too much that's made of that,
And maybe the calming techniques can be helpful for that too. And, passion can be a little P, but, interest, and sometimes just a lot, I think your suggestion's so good. I'm just thinking of a couple of clients that I have who've started working with me in their 50s, and they're all, now while they're still working, they're developing some of these interests. For some, it was things that just as a kid they thought that they wanted to do. For another, it's, just pursuing, kind of, you mentioned with your husband, the love of history. I have one person who ended up, as we were brainstorming, he said, I've always loved military history. I think I'm going to look into that and see. So kind of just finding ways while you're still working, so that you begin to realize you do have you are something more than your work. There's more facets of your identity that I think is important.
Yeah, and actually there was one man that I interviewed who now gives tours of San Francisco. And when he retired, he started doing that more. So using what you love, and I guess it's easy to say, don't worry, because we do worry. But I think just feeling good about who you are and what you need is so important.
So I have a practical question from Eileen here from Virginia. She says, Louise, did you downsize your possessions and or your home? Did you use an organizer? What advice would you offer to someone desiring to downsize? What kind of emotional support do you think is necessary, and how does one go about planning for this area?
Okay, it's interesting because in some ways I would be willing to downsize. I'm just, answering the personal part of it first, to sell our house in San Francisco and live some cheaper, really, and be able to have a much easier financial life. But my husband really does not want to do that at all. And there's some ways that I don't want to either, and both of my kids are not too far away. So, that's part of it too. So in terms of my life, it's actually been more stressful financially. We rent our house out on Airbnb, and so that's not really downsizing, but we did have to do a lot of cleaning up and getting rid of things, and it is an income stream that's really important to us. I do have something in the book, though, about sometimes people who move places and think that the new place is going to be perfect, especially moving home, like to an old, place where they used to live. And, the article that I used was saying it's really important that people go perhaps live someplace, if they can, for a few months to really, really see if that's really what you want to do. Because sometimes just making a move and thinking it's all going to be perfect, it doesn't always work out that way. So to really check things out. So there are a lot of people who, rent their place first and then go to a new place. And, it's a little like when I was saying about being at the grotto, the new community, if you leave a place where you have a lot of friends, you are going to be thrown into that kind of middle school crisis, trying to make new friends and figure it out. But a lot of people have my cousins I know sold their house and moved to North Carolina, which was cheaper, and have, created a wonderful life there. So it's not something that I've personally done, but the only advice from what I've read would be to really check it out. Check out the new place if you're going to move to a new place. Of course, if you're just going to move 5 miles away or get a smaller house, that's not as big a deal.
And I wanted to just add something about the organizers. Many people find it very, very helpful to hire an organizer. There's this new specialty of, people, who really help people with the downsizing. And, people either can hire an organizer, or it can also be helpful to have a friend come and help, because it can be pretty overwhelming. And I think it's important to sort of know that, and it's often really a good investment to have somebody there helping you, or at least a friend if you're, going through clothes and pictures and furniture. And many people do find organizers helpful, and also suggest taking pictures of things so that then it's sometimes easier to let go of them.
No, that's a great idea.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say my niece hired an organizer, and it was amazing, the amount of things she threw out, but just, she just kept some very, very special, precious things. And when you say, Dory, about the pictures, I realized we got rid of a trunk that I had as a kid, which had all these stickers on it. And I thought, I wish I had taken just some pictures of it. I could have framed it. So it's wonderful that we can do that now, that we can keep things without without putting them in boxes and creating dust and all of those kinds of things. So yeah, organizers are really helpful. But all of that is emotional too as you go through things. Right. So, you want to give yourself time to go through boxes and to think about it. So,
right. Yeah. No, I think that's really important. So David from Boston says, you mentioned a number of fears. How do you deal with the fear of the loss of a steady paycheck and longer-term financial concerns?
Yeah, I don't mean to laugh, but, I'm certainly not, I am not the poster child for being financially perfect at all. But what was interesting in the book is that I interviewed one woman who basically, is on a Social Security check in a rent-controlled apartment, and she does some caregiving work. And, she's worried about money, of course, although she feels very good about her life and what she's done. And then I interviewed people with, millions of dollars in the bank who are really worried about money because, of stocks and bonds. So I think it's a worry that everybody has. And, I'm not a financial advisor, so I can't really say, what, to worry or not worry. But worry doesn't really, as we all know, worry doesn't really help. It's just sitting and doing the numbers and thinking, well, can I make it? I might not be able to go out to the same restaurants I always went out to, or I might not be able to travel as much, but can I create a happy life and a good life and doing things I want to do with the money I have? But it just seems universal that no matter how much money or how little money people have, that's always a fear. And, so I guess it's more sitting and figuring out, there was one financial planner actually in Boston, Jennifer Lane, who I Compass Planning, who does financial planning, but she said to keep track of every expense, from dog food to a latte out at Starbucks or wherever for a month. Just keep track of everything you spend and then see, well, what is it that you might have to give up or not give up and how you can do it. I mean, we got a pet. We got a dog, which I didn't really mention so far 2 years ago. And in many ways, we couldn't really afford a pet. But I knew that she would add so much to our lives that, we did it and we're managing. And so sometimes you make decisions that aren't maybe perfect financially, but are good emotionally. So it's always, playing those off each other.
And I'm a believer that no matter how much or how little money you have, it really is helpful to talk to a financial planner, particularly one with a holistic viewpoint that helps you really it's not just the number, but sort of the lifestyle you want. So, so that you really know if this is a good time to stop working and having a paycheck, or, if you want to leave what you're doing, but maybe see what's possible in terms of part-time work or, working, using your skills in a different way. And, I think as you said, Louise, it's just different for everybody, but I really do think it's helpful to have some piece of reality about the amount of money that you need. I just wanted to throw that part in.
That's very important because, you don't want to feel stressed out about money all the time when you've retired. So it's a really good suggestion.
And some people want to simplify their life and some don't. And sometimes people discover they need more money after they retire than before. But you and your husband have also been very creative over the years, Louise, because I think you mentioned in the book that you often would have students that would live with you so that there'd be some income coming in, so that, there's a need of being sort of creative, of just, thinking about how do you, in your unique situation, kind of make it work.
Yeah, exactly. We had, when our kids were starting high school, we decided to send them to a private high school. And so for tuition, there are lots of programs where you can have a student living with you. So we did that. And now I just feel so lucky now in my life because I'm teaching part-time, but the classes I really love to teach, small memoir workshops. And then I'm also getting to write. And the Airbnb can be stressful, but I'm so lucky we found that as a way to make some extra money. So yeah, you can definitely get creative and figure it out. But I think you made a really good point, Dory, that people need to think about their unique situation and what they like. Maybe you don't want to give up going out to, a restaurant that you love to go to. So you might need more money. So it's really thinking about what would make you happy.
Right. So Serena from Charleston asks, she says, Louise, I follow your Facebook page and wonder what this upcoming generation is missing in planning for retirement. What are they missing that you see your generation has done?
Well, it's a mixed bag because I think there are a lot of people in my generation, I'll be 69 this year, who actually didn't do a lot of great planning. Right. Baby boomers who were, I mentioned that in the book, who were living in the moment, or went from job to job, or didn't have really enough in retirement. And I think now with a lot of defined benefit pensions going away, that people have to really think about it much earlier. So I think it's a mixed bag. I mean, I think there are still probably a lot of baby boomers who did have more pensions or were able to plan better. And I would say, my own kids, the earlier you start, the better, putting money away. If I guess this is a question more about the finances, right? Or, that. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah,
answering.
Yeah, I think it's about the finances, but also just thinking about sort of what gives purpose and meaning to your life. You mentioned, and I know it's such an important area, and you mentioned it in the book too, but, kind of connection, engagement, and purpose and meaning. And I think, the earlier people start thinking about that, as well as, and I think you mentioned in the book, and it's true, if kids could start thinking, even if at whatever, teenagers or, kids in their 20s start putting away $50,
right?
It's amazing by the time they're 65 or 70, depending on what happens in the market, but it could compound, right?
Yeah, but I think when you mentioned the connection too, I think as we all know with technology and the cell phones and on, that the face-to-face time has often gotten lost. And so sometimes I feel the younger generation really longs for that. I really feel they do. And I think there are going to be a lot of changes. I just think whatever some of the things we had in the 60s, I think of the community dinners and people just coming in and out of each other's houses in a more just informal way was a lot of things that I think is wonderful. And one thing is, the people as we get older are going to get disabled. So create a dinner that you can bring over to that person's house once a week or once a month. And so that we can build community locally and work on that. And that creates a happier life for everybody, for all the generations.
Oh, that's so true. And just, the being needed, I mean, it helps the person who needs you, and it's helping you, and the intergenerational aspect of it too. It's all so important. I want to ask you another question, Louise, but Bob from Kentucky said he just wanted to comment, excellent sharing of wisness, wellness, and wholeness, much appreciated. And he said that you sound like you may be somebody who would be wonderful for Saging International. It's an organization focusing on becoming a conscious elder. And I'm happy to tell you some about that organization.
Yeah, well, people can email me,
Yeah. Do you want to give your email address and as well as your website that people or your Facebook group and how they can get your book? Why don't we do that, and then I'll ask you the other question.
Okay, yeah. Anybody feel free to email me at Louise Nayer, that's an Nayer, @gmail.com. So feel free. And the other thing is my website is just louisenayer.com. And I do have a Facebook author page. It just says Louise Nayer author page, and I've been trying to post blogs pretty regularly on that. So, yeah, get in touch. I look forward to hearing from some of you.
But can you talk a little about, you've mentioned some of it, but what are some of the difficulties you and others encountered after retirement? I mean, you've mentioned a little, but I just think it may be helpful for people to, go ahead.
Well, I think one of the biggest difficulties for me, and I did mention it when I went to the grotto, was just missing my coworkers, people I had seen for so many, many years. And then the other thing was, for me, since I know I needed to make some money, I just took on too many classes. And then suddenly I woke up and I thought, I really wanted to retire so I could write more. What am I doing filling my days with all this teaching? As much as I love having some teaching. So I think the difficulties, and then I had financial concerns to think about too. And so I think all of those felt like obstacles, but in the end, now I walk into the grotto and I don't have they're not the same as my coworkers for 27 years, but they're my friends and it's a new community and it's what I wanted. So when Jim and I, my husband and I, have figured out the financial part of what we needed to do. So I think at first you're hit with these obstacles, but over time it does get worked out. And so that's another thing, that I'm working on in my life, just having faith that things will work out. And I think that's really important, as you face these obstacles in this transition, just think, well, in time, I'm going to figure it out and I'll make it work. So that's a really important mantra almost to say to yourself, it will work out.
Maybe mention the breathing too, or if there are any other calming kind of.
Oh, yeah. Well, the breathing thing is, and this was given to me by my hypnotist, was that every time you make a transition, so for instance, when you end this call and you stand up, you're going to go into another room. You breathe into the count of 4 and out to the count of 8. And it's unbelievable how much that makes or has made me feel better or makes other people feel better, because we tend to breathe really shallowly, and just getting more air and taking note that you're making a transition. Now you're going to a new place, or now you're going to your car. It's amazing, and it's very, very simple. So try it.
I think it's a great idea. I often have people, I suggest once an hour, but I like the idea of the consciousness of transition rather than just, once an hour to do that. But it really does center you, and it just can get you ready for whatever you're going to do next. So I think I've covered the questions from people on the call. A lot of the questions I've been thinking about, we've talked about. So I do want to just again say the title of Louise's book, which is Poised for Retirement, Moving from Anxiety to Zen. And I heartily recommend it. And I know it's available from Amazon. And let's just take a few more minutes if you're willing, Louise, and just what are some additional, you've been sharing wonderful words of wisdom this whole time. What are just kind of other takeaways you'd like to leave with people as they end this call and transition to whatever they're doing next?
Well, one thing I had a quote from Gawande, who wrote Being Mortal, and he talks about everybody, excuse me, wanting to, create a narrative of their life. And as well, David Brooks talks about, in the end, what's important is our eulogy, not our resume. So I guess what I want to leave with that, as I've gotten older and I've been retired for a while, I mean, it's not that I have my writing, which I'm driven to do and want to get out into the world, and I love my teaching, but it's really the little kindnesses every day that really fill me with joy. In other words, whether it's, smiling at a baby in a stroller, or if you're on the New York City subway, helping somebody who needs help getting out of the car or across the street. And I think that's what is important, is the everyday things and the things that we do every day that bring us joy and bring other people joy. And they can be really simple. They don't have to be big, and they don't have to lead toward any major success. We can let go of some of that. So that's what I'm learning more. And for me, also having a pet, is important. Yeah. And I know and it's also challenging, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to everybody. But, it's those little things that are everyday things that fill your life. So I guess that's how I'd end.
Oh, that's lovely. I do agree with the pets. I don't know what I would do without our little Ziggy, our dog. So this was just lovely. Thank you so much, Louise, for being here and being with all of us today. And I was just remembering that Betsy Worley is the person that introduced me to you.
Yes.
Thank Betsy for making that connection.
Betsy.
So thank you all for being here today, and thank you again, Louise, for taking the time to be with us. So take care, everybody.
Oh, thank you.
You've been listening to Revolutionize Your Retirement Radio with Dr. Dorian Mintzer. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show, listen to past episodes, or download our free retirement transition guide, visit revolutionizeyourretirementradio.com.